hard is a PhD? Well, you'll be glad to know it's actually not as hard as you might think. In fact, I would go as far as to say that my GCSEs, my A-levels, and my cabin crew training were all more difficult than my PhD. Okay, so I've got you intrigued, right? Now, difficult is a subjective term. What is difficult? When I say that I found my GCSEs and A-levels and cabin crew training more difficult, it is because I had to remember lots of things and I had to really study to try and retain that information. And a PhD is not, largely, it's not like that. It is a different type of difficult. Really, if you're going to do a PhD and if it's going to work for you, really depends on what kind of person you are. So, today in this video, I am going to talk all about, is a PhD hard? What's hard about it and what's not so hard? You can make your own decisions on whether this is the right thing for you or not. Okay, so is a PhD hard? Well, largely I would say no. It's not hard in terms of you have to do lots of revision and you have to remember lots of things. For me, studying for GCSEs, for example, I had to study lots of things that I wasn't really very interested in. I found that really difficult to motivate myself to write about these things, to learn these things, to revise these things. Whereas a PhD is different. A PhD should be your passion project. It should be something that you are interested in. And if it's not, then we've got a bit of a problem there because it is a big old piece of work. And when I say big, yeah, pretty big. It is a big old piece of work. And if you're not interested in it, if you're not passionate about it, and don't get me wrong, we all lose our interest and our passion a little bit from time to time. But ultimately, if you're not interested, if you're not motivated, you're going to struggle and you might not finish that PhD. So that's a pretty important thing to remember. What I'm trying to say is a PhD should be something that you're interested in and something that you want to learn, which keeps you going and it's very motivating. But having said that, what is hard about doing a PhD is finding that motivation. And as I said, doing something that you are passionate about definitely helps. But you do need to be motivated. You do need to be self-disciplined. You need to be able to structure your day, to motivate yourself to get out of bed, not to put the TV on, to spend those hours in the lab, on the computer, in the library, whatever it might be. And for most people, that is what's really the most difficult thing about doing a PhD, not the work itself a lot of the time. Now, when we ask the question, how hard is a PhD? I think that actually you make your own answer to this question. Your PhD, in many ways, is as difficult as you make it. I remember when I wrote my proposal, so I was at the very beginning of my journey and I didn't really know where this journey was going. I was really quite naive to the whole PhD process at this time. And as part of my research proposal, I suggested that I did 3 types of data collection. And I had 3 totally different types. 2 were qualitative, which I did feel quite comfortable with and I had a bit of experience with. 1 was quantitative. And actually, I'm not great at stats, I'm not great at maths. I had no experience of this and I really could have made my life a lot easier if I didn't do that quantitative section. Don't get me wrong, it was a great learning experience, but I spent many, many hours in the library reading books about statistics and statistical tests and trying to get my head around stuff that actually a lot of the time was relatively simple, but I'd never been exposed to it. I'd never touched on this before. And really, I don't think that was that smart. I should have planned my PhD journey, the methodology, as well as the topic, to suit me and my strengths and my areas of interest. And I wasn't really interested in statistics. I didn't know what I was letting myself in for, and that was a mistake. And because of that, I felt that I made my PhD journey a lot more difficult, and I didn't need to. So ultimately, when you are in the early stages of your PhD, think about what's the easiest way I can do this? And that's not a cop-out, because it won't be as easy as you think, but you don't want to make yourself have to work harder than you need to, and you don't want to really make life more difficult. Another thing that is hard about doing a PhD is not actually doing the PhD itself, but it's the things that come as part of the parcel with that. And one of the things that often will have to happen is that you might find that you are giving up social aspects of your life, social events, your weekends, your evenings. And this is especially true if you are doing your PhD alongside a full-time job, or even a part-time job for that matter, or maybe you have children, so you are with the kids in the day and you are working in the evenings when they go to sleep. So if you are doing more than one thing, i.e. your PhD isn't your full-time position, then there is going to have to be a compromise in there. And I did my PhD part-time alongside a full-time teaching role. To begin with, I was working at an FE college. I was teaching about 26 to 28 hours a week. And then I moved on to a university position where I was teaching something in the range of 15 hours a week. And then obviously you've got all the rest of your job to do as well. So it was very challenging, and I did have to give up my weekends. I did have to give up my evenings. And this can be hard for a lot of people. Another thing that can be really hard when you're doing a PhD is staying focused and staying motivated. You are probably looking at a minimum of 3 years. Not many people do their PhD in less than 3 years. And it could last anything up to sort of maybe even 10 years. I've heard of people doing their PhD over the span of 10 years, which is a pretty big time frame. So throughout this time, you are working on this one project, and you've got this one area of research that you are focusing on, and you need to keep the interest, you need to keep the motivation, you need to keep the dedication. As I explained in my video about the top reasons why you absolutely should do a PhD, if you haven't seen that one, do check it out. It is very motivational, I hope. As I explained in that video, one of the things that I think is great about doing a PhD is actually that it doesn't just demonstrate your higher level of thinking and your ability to analyse, but it also demonstrates that you are a motivated and a determined and a disciplined person, and you can plan your own time, manage your own time, etc. And when you are applying for jobs, that is something that looks great. That looks really good. They are transferable skills that are really, really good. But whilst that is one of the good outcomes from doing a PhD, it is something that a lot of people do find a bit challenging, and you do have to work on that. So that is another thing that some people find hard about doing a PhD. Another thing that can be hard when you are doing a PhD is maintaining a positive relationship with your supervisors. Now, I cannot emphasize this enough. Your supervisors are absolutely key to the progression of your PhD, how you get through your PhD journey, how enjoyable that is, and how successful it is ultimately. Your PhD supervisors are the ones who guide you. They are your teachers, they are your mentors. If you do not have a positive relationship with them, this can cause a lot of problems, to the extent that I've actually known people who have quit their PhDs because they did not have that positive relationship with their supervisors. Now, one of the things that you can do is to try and find supervisors in advance of starting your PhD, if this is an option for you, that you think you will get along well with, where you perhaps share similar mindset or a similar ethos, or you've got similar opinions on things. That can often be quite beneficial. But you might not have the opportunity to choose your research supervisor. If that is the case, what you really need to do is to try and develop that relationship and to try and make it as positive as you can, because ultimately they are such an important part of your research. Another thing that is hard about doing a PhD is the impact that it can have on your mental health and your psychological well-being. Now, I do talk about this in another video that I recently made, which was about the 5 reasons not to do a PhD. So if you are undecided or you're on the fence, I definitely recommend that you check that one out. In that video, I do talk about the effects that doing a PhD can have on your mental health. It can be super lonely. You are basically in this classroom, essentially, all on your own. You've got no peers, no classmates. There might be other PhD students, but they are studying their own topics. They're doing their own thesis, their own research papers, their own projects. You are the only person who's really in your zone. Your supervisors dip in and out, but ultimately, you're on your own. And for some people, this is fine, but for some people, it's not. So one of the things that people do find really hard about doing a PhD is that it can be really, really lonely. Another thing that can be a bit tough when you are doing your PhD is the expectations alongside your main research. Now, this often comes in two shapes. It is often publications and presentations. So you might have to do publications as part of your project. So perhaps you might not be able to even graduate without these publications, or you might just be pushed to do it as you're going through your research, or it might just be well, you should do it if you want to get a job kind of thing. And the publication process is tough. It's really tough. Ideally, you want to have your publications in high quality journals. If you can get a high quality academic in on those, then that is a bonus. It can be challenging to get that spot in that high quality journal because there is a rigorous review process, and some researchers will like what you're writing and some won't. And I think this is inevitable. Whatever level you're at, however great your research might be, it's probably not going to please everybody. So when you go through this review process, it can be challenging in that people are very critical, and rightly so, but that can be quite damaging sometimes in terms of your self-confidence. Also, it takes a really long time. I've submitted journal papers and there's not been an outcome for like a year and a half. Like, that's a really long time. So that can be quite arduous and quite nerve-wracking sometimes as well. Alongside this, we also have the expectation to present. So you might be presenting at conferences, webinars, PhD colloquiums, any other sort of events like this. A lot of people, when they sign up for a PhD, they might not necessarily be outgoing people. People often don't realise the requirement that there is actually to speak publicly, and not just to speak, but also to defend what you're saying and be able to have critical debate on a public stage. And that can be quite frightening for some people. Some people are quite introverted, and that's not something they're particularly excited about. So that is another thing that's quite hard about doing a PhD for some people. And the last thing that I will mention when I answer the question, is a PhD hard, or is doing a PhD hard, is a financial matter. Now, it can be quite hard when you finish university to have somebody who's at the same level as you, who goes into the workplace and starts working their way up the ladder, and they start developing their career and they start bringing in money. All the while, you are continuing either to be on a funded PhD, which probably isn't giving you loads of money, or you are funding it yourself, potentially racking up debt or using a lot of time because you're working and studying at the same time. Let's just say, for argument's sake, it takes you 3 years to do your PhD. 3 years down the line, who's further ahead actually? Is it you, or is it your peer who didn't do the PhD? And I think that's something that you need to think carefully about, because depending on which area it is that you're doing your PhD in, you might not really need the PhD at all actually. And you might find that your peer is ahead of you. And even if you do come out ahead of them at the end of the PhD, it can still be quite difficult during that process to watch your peers start to develop their career and excel in their career and get promoted and all of that kind of stuff. And that can be quite hard. Also, being broke can be pretty tough too. So that is something else to consider when you are asking yourself, how hard is a PhD? So ultimately, my answer to the question, how hard is a PhD, is largely, it's as hard as you make it. There are lots of things that you can do to make these things that I've talked about in this video less difficult and less challenging for you. You can plan your finances. I know that might not be the answer to all of your problems, and you're probably not going to get rich, but it can certainly help. You can put strategies in place to help motivate yourself, and I'll do a video on those at some point. And you can do different practices and you can do training to help with the public speaking and all of these sort of things. There are ways that you can make it less hard. So I hope that was helpful. If you are thinking about doing a PhD, I do have 2 more videos that I really think you will like about the 5 reasons that you should and the 5 reasons that you shouldn't do a PhD. Would I do mine again given the chance? Such a tough question. I'm not sure. But you can make your own decisions on whether you think doing a PhD is for you or not.